Hello and welcome. This is a podcast explaining Ukraine by UkraineWorld.org. We continue our podcasts about the war which Russia started against Ukraine. This series is brought to you by Internews Ukraine and Ukraine Crisis Media Center, two Ukrainian media NGOs. My name is Volodymyr Yermolenko. I am chief editor of UkraineWorld.org. We are making this podcast with Tatiana Harkova, who is in charge of international outreach at Ukraine Crisis Media Center. Hello, Tanya.
Hello.
Before we start, let me remind you that you can support us on Patreon, patreon.com/UkraineWorld. So today is 3 months since the war has started, since this full-scale invasion has started. On 24th of February, Russia started this war, this second Russian-Ukrainian war against Ukraine with missile strikes on Ukrainian cities. 3 months have passed. We're trying to draw some conclusions. What is the first conclusion for you?
I think that now what we observe now is Russia's strategic fail in the war. I say strategic. It doesn't mean that Russia has no successes on the Ukrainian ground. Unfortunately, this is not true because during these months, Mariupol fell in a way because the Ukrainian military were evacuated from Azovstal. But I am talking about strategic fail because now when the time goes, we see that no objectives that Russia stated in the very beginning and even later, it cannot achieve these objectives. For example, in the beginning, the plan was quite clear. It was to capture Ukraine. I mean, to decapitate the capital, to impose another government, and all other things. Now, what we see that they try to realize a different plan B maybe, on Donbass. And this is also a failure because each week this plan is becoming even less important and even less strategic. And in a way, we see that with sanctions, with all this international pressure, we'll discuss that later, but with all this isolation Russia is suffering from. For example, today, President Zelensky delivered his speech at Davos Forum, very important economic forum in Davos, which is annual meeting, and he was invited there. He was the first person to speak, and Russia was excluded from this meeting at all. So, and in place of so-called Russia's house, Ukrainians organized this Museum of War Crimes of Russia, this place of House of War Crimes of Russia, presenting evidence of Russia war crimes. This is not nothing, in fact. So everybody, a lot of countries, a lot of people all around the world are talking about Russia as a criminal. And in a way, so this is a kind of a huge miscalculation from Putin, because his strategic goal was to Russia become stronger. But what we see now, Russia is becoming weaker in a way. So this is quite clear now. And even more, I don't see any good way for Russia to stop this war. They have to continue now. They have to continue on Donbass without any great results, great victories. But they have no way out of this war. So this is what I call a strategic fail. Strategic fail in this war, this is clear for everybody. Even if we don't know exactly when the war will end and on which terms and what kind, maybe we'll lose some territories or not. We do hope that we will not. But it is clear that Russia is already losing this war because Russia is becoming even more isolated and weak country.
I agree totally, and we going further. And the second conclusion can be that the battle for Donbass is also not bringing too much success, because Russians initially they had some kind of a cunningness in their announcement of the war. If you remember, on 24th of February, this special operation was entitled the Special Operation to Liberate Donbass. The questions was reason as why liberating Donbass if you're attacking Kiev, if you're attacking Kharkiv, if you're attacking from the south. But they I think that they would be claiming that, look, we are decapitating Ukrainian capital, we are putting our government, and then we turn Ukraine into a kind of a vassal state. Uh, Probably in the same way as they try to do in Kazakhstan, by the way. A very short operation. They come and they go, right? They didn't succeed in that, but the key goal they announced about Donbass is there. And what's happening now? They're advancing in Luhansk Oblast. They're not advancing in Donetsk Oblast. Their key success in Donetsk Oblast is, of course, Mariupol. They really advanced much in Luhansk Oblast. There is this battle for these three cities, which is very important. Three cities which were the center of Ukraine-controlled Luhansk Oblast since all these 8 years: the Lysychansk, Severodonetsk, and Rubizhne. Out of these cities, Rubizhne is already under Russian control. But it's totally destroyed. So Rubizhne right now is like Mariupol, but they cannot really take this to other cities. And with regard to Donetsk Oblast, their successes are even more limited. So it appears that in 3 months they cannot really achieve even that part of their task, to go on the administrative borders of Donetsk and Luhansk
That's
regions.
it. And let's mention also Kharkiv region. It was liberated recently during this third month of the war, and it complicates things for Russians in Donbass because they controlled Kharkiv, not Kharkiv as a city, but the Kharkiv region, and they used it, for example, the town of Izium to attack further on the south and to get some more control on Lugansk region, but they didn't succeed here. So even more, they had to retreat their troops from almost all the region of Kharkiv. There's still some troops there, but we cannot speak today about total liberation of Kharkiv region. But still, if you compare to the situation 1 month ago, what we see Kharkiv liberated, much less shellings today as for example, if you compare to 2 weeks ago, still some shellings yesterday, day before yesterday in Saltivka, but still this is not like what was happening, unfortunately, in Kharkiv during the first 2 months of
We
occupation.
know the stories of people who are living in Saltivka, for example, the residential quarter, which was heavily shelled by the Russians. They are now coming back. So they're now coming back to Kharkiv, some of them, and that it is a sign that, well, the living in the city becomes less dangerous. But of course, Kharkiv is 40 kilometers from Russian border, so even without entering Ukrainian territory, Russians will be able to shell the city.
But at the same time, in Donbass region, in Lugansk region, situation is really dramatic, even dramatic for Russians, but also for Ukrainians. We all hoped that this famous battle for Donbass will last for 2-3 weeks, but what we see now is already the 5th week of this attack, and it's never-ending story. They shell with all kind of aviation, missiles, artillery. Then they try to capture several meters of territory, and then they send tanks. And normally, if everything is all right, Ukrainians are able to push them away, but it costs in terms of human lives quite a lot for Ukrainians as well. President Zelensky mentioned yesterday, if I'm not mistaken, about losing from 50 to 100 soldiers, Ukrainian soldiers per day in Donbass only. So that's why heavy weapons are highly needed, expected in Ukraine, because Russia is not counting its soldiers. So they are doing everything possible to progress in Lugansk. 90% of this region is already under their control. But let us be clear, before the 24th of February, they controlled over 70% already. 60% of the region. So I might be mistaken.
Luhansk Oblast?
Yes.
Before this invasion?
Yeah.
No, much less.
Much less.
One third, something like that.
30%.
Yes.
so let's be clear. So it was already part was already occupied before the 24th of February. It's difficult to calculate but they have the most success there. But in Donetsk region, much less territory is occupied after 24th of February, except of Mariupol. But Mariupol, it comes from the south, so it's a different direction of the
And
attack.
this occupation in Luhansk Oblast, it's primarily the northern part of Luhansk Oblast, which is bordering Russia, so it was easier to take it.
And
Let's move forward, I think, and let's talk about this international support. So, what do the 3 months of this invasion tell us about international Western support?
I think that our conclusion after 3 months of this invasion is that the West support, the Western support of Ukraine in this war goes far beyond sanctions. What we feared a lot in the beginning, just let's recall what was happening in the first days of war. We were still discussing Nord Stream 2. We were still discussing first sanctions like SWIFT or not SWIFT. We were discussing diplomatic pressure, economic pressure, some kind of isolation, but nobody was speaking about weapons. And I do remember we were asking for close the sky and all this in view of all this destruction coming from Russian missiles. Today, we see that there is a kind of a coalition, a real coalition, a Western coalition against Russia. And it's not only in terms of sanctions, but it's also in terms of weapons, because this famous meeting in Ramstein, military base in Germany. So today we had already the second meeting, and more than 40 countries support Ukraine with arms. So I mean, with weapons, with helicopters, with what kind of other javelins? Not javelins. It was in the first stage with heavy artillery systems. This is extremely important. We are already discussing missiles, and we are already discussing fighter jets. They are not still here, but this maybe will be in the next part. We are talking about Patriots today. As of today, we are already talking about maybe that Patriots will be delivered from the United States here. We dreamed about Patriots in the end of February, but now they have all chances to arrive into Ukrainian territory. So this solidarity, it is really solid in comparison with what we had in the beginning. It's still not enough. It's still not so efficient and quick, because every day costs a lot for Ukrainians, for Ukrainian people, because we lose our best soldiers. But it is, you cannot compare. If somebody would tell you back in February that Patriots will be arriving and that 40 something countries will be united in a conference, I mean, defense ministers discussing what kind of weapons Ukraine needs, so it would be something surrealistic for us in February. But now it's a reality.
But at the same time, there is this advance of weapons is not as fast, and as probably Ukraine would need, and not from all the countries. And here's the problem, because we understand that the more the war is delayed, the more it is prolonged, the better opportunities would Russia have to reallocate its forces, to kind of accumulate its forces, its strength. And this is, I think, this should be pronounced. The two things should be pronounced. First, the word victory should be pronounced, and it has already been pronounced by some states, that Ukraine should win in this war, not only not lose, but win in this war. Despite the fact that we hear some voices, for example, in Germany, one of the recent articles by German famous philosopher Jürgen Habermas, who would tell that losing this war for you, if Ukraine loses this war, it is bad, but also if the war is escalating, it is also bad, and therefore we should find a situation when Ukraine does not lose this war, but also Russia does not lose this war. So this is a kind of a typical win-win illusion, I would say, in which is still in some circles, some medias in the West. But it is really important to stress first that Ukraine should win and Russia should lose. And the second thing is that is the matter of time. So Ukraine's strength is not indefinite, and it needs ammunitions, for example, not only artillery but also ammunitions for the artillery as soon as possible. Because otherwise, we can face a situation when the war is delayed, when it is prolonged, when everything turns into a kind of a big Donbass. The situation that we had over the last 8 years, when both sides, the Russian and Ukrainian sides, will just fortify their positions, and then we have much bigger territory under Russian control than before 24th of February, and it will be much, much more difficult to liberate it in the cities, but also not only in the cities. So we should understand that people who are saying, okay, let's wait, let's talk, let's see what happens, let's open up the room for peace talks. These people, they are thinking that they're working for peace, but actually they're working for the war. They're serving the war. Because if the situation is stalled, if we have a stalemate, then it is obvious that Russia will use this territory it conquered to attack again in a few years.
So let's pronounce it clearly that some countries are still afraid of Ukrainian victory in a way. So, and some European countries, some big European countries. You've mentioned Germany, but similar things could be told about France's position in this war, because we've seen before the war Emmanuel Macron visiting Putin and talking to him many times. And after Bucha, he stopped calling Putin, but 1 month after Bucha, he restarted calling, trying to negotiate things to try to see what Putin really wants. So this is Ukraine's victory is not something to be afraid of. So we should argue and provide arguments why is it so. But I'm convinced that it's in interest of everybody on this continent to have a solid security system and not allow any further escalation. Maybe this is just my hypothesis that maybe this support of Ukraine is arriving so slowly, just to weaken Russia slowly, in a way that it not a lot of weapons will be needed to destroy their army, and maybe not to make any kind of moves which would provoke Putin or provoke escalation. Maybe this is the plan. But for Ukrainians, even if it might be logical, but it's bloody situation for us, because every day there is people losing their lives, both civilians and military, and a lot of destructions every day, and not only military objects, we've talked about that many times, but also civilian infrastructure, museums, culture centers, and all these kind of things, schools, hospitals, all that. We will need a lot of money to rebuild all that. So this is a plan. This plan has its some defaults for Ukraine. That's quite clear, and we still have to convince some of our partners. When we pronounce NATO or European Union, by the way, the next summit will be taking place in June, so in 1 month, and this will be the decisive summit for Ukraine, because our membership plan, could be discussed there, and we still have to convince some European leaders that Ukraine did everything possible to enter this European family. And we still have some remarks that it will take time. It maybe will take 10 years or 15 years. Some remarks which don't encourage, in a way, Ukrainian people to fight for values we cherish, like liberty, democracy, and all these important things.
So yeah, the key intrigue of the summit is whether Ukraine will be granted a candidate status, or there will be some way out by the European leaders, in particular, primarily Paris and Berlin. Let's be serious. Let's be frank about that. That some of the way out, that candidate status would not be pronounced, and they will find some other formula. Let's not forget that neither Macron nor Scholz have visited Ukraine after the 24th of February, contrary to many other leaders, contrary to British Prime Minister, contrary to Polish President Duda was just here, I think yesterday, right? But Canadian Prime Minister Trudeau, the First Lady, United States First Lady, visited Ukraine. The chief of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, also the chief of the European Council. So the European institutions were quite active, and not these key European countries. So we can expect some bad things probably from them. But let's be frank. I mean, even if the candidate status is given to Ukraine, the process of entering the European Union is always very much bureaucratic. I mean, the Western Balkan countries, many of them are for 15 years having this candidate status, and still are not members. Turkey, I think, even more. I think it had candidate status in early 2000 or something like that. So I think European citizens should not be afraid that Ukraine will become tomorrow EU member state. But candidate status is important symbolically, because and politically, because obviously this will show to Russia that there is no way back. So no way back, and in Ukraine will not go back to the Russian orbit of
Let's
interest.
talk about things we know about occupation, because for already 3 months, many Ukrainian regions, not many, but still we do know things about Kherson and about some other territories which are occupied. So, what do we know about occupation, about its nature, and how things
So
are?
what's happening right now in the territories which are occupied? Well, there are many different things. We know that the disaster of Mariupol, everybody talks about it. But while Ukrainians were liberating Kharkiv Oblast, unfortunately, we have reports about Russian atrocities, and they're pronounced by Ukrainian ombudswoman Lyudmila Denisova, and they're just horrible. If you read them, uh, I mean, it is very important that the international prosecution will identify whether these reports are true, because these are addresses from the people, from citizens, to Ukrainian ombudswoman who is protecting the human rights, but they're just absolutely impossible to read. It's stories about rape. It's stories about rape of the babies. The stories that one or triplets of girls of 9 year olds were raped by a bunch of Russian soldiers. Stories about the babies of several months which were raped by the candles. Some of them, I think, the report that 1 year boy has died out of that, etc. So again, these are just reports by the citizens, and they should be carefully studied, because we understand that everything should be documented. But this is Ukrainian official, Ukrainian ombudswoman who says about it, and well, this is an official source.
So we are talking about these war crimes, in fact, in war crimes in territories which were occupied and then liberated, but we still don't know a lot. So we know for sure, but this is indirectly from Kherson, from all these occupied territories.
So in
About
Kherson Oblast, the situation is a little bit different. We don't hear so many reports about atrocities and war crimes, but we know that about 500 people are in the basements, in the so-called basements. So they are tortured. They're tortured by the electricity shocks, and some of them are in Kherson or in Kherson Oblast. Some of them are moved to Crimea, to Sevastopol, where they are treated as FSB, knows how to treat them. So quite probably we hope that these people will be alive. We hope that they will be surviving, as they will survive. But quite probably we will hear the reports as we hear, for example, from journalists like Stanislav Aseev about Izolyatia in Donetsk, the concentration camps.
But it's still in
So
function. Izolyatia is still in function, and
yes,
some
yes,
people
yes.
were sent there.
So yeah, so the strategy, as far as we understand it, or as far as Ukrainian government understands it, and we have this information from Tamila Tasheva, who is representative of Ukrainian president for Crimea, but they're also dealing with Kherson Oblast. Kherson Oblast can be attached to Crimea by the Russian decision. It seems that the key aim is not to kill people, but to intimidate them, to intimidate the most active people with pro-Ukrainian position, and also they're not letting people out. So for several reasons. First, they want to hold a referendum, probably about something, the so-called referendum. Second, they want to keep the civilians as a living shield against possible Ukrainian counteroffensive. And third, they want to mobilize them into the Russian army. So this is one of the tragedies of this situation. When Russians occupy territories, they engage the Ukrainian locals into the army against the Ukrainian army.
And that's what we know also for sure is that after this mobilization process in Donetsk and Lugansk, there were several manifestations, as we call them, of women against the mobilization of their husbands, because according to the new documents released and they were available online, they mobilized people from 16 years old until 65. So everybody, and also women, starting surprisingly from 35. I'm not sure why after 35, maybe because other women, younger women, they are more busy with kids. We don't know exactly, but we've seen these official papers online. So they are trying to do everything possible to transform, in a way, this war in a kind of civil war.
Yeah, that's very remarkable.
Yeah.
Yes, indeed.
So what they were claiming back in 2014, that this is a kind of a civil war, but it wasn't a civil war. But now when they mobilize people, and nobody wants, women were against, because if they take your husband or your son and you are alone and you are living on the occupied territory, and they just kill, and they send these people, these Ukrainians, to the front without proper ammunition, without proper weapons. They are just using them for the first attack. So people, they enter first the battlefield, so they're very often killed. And you have to be very intelligent to know how to escape and how to say that you don't want to fight and just to be on the other side, to surrender, to go to the other side. It's extremely difficult military operation. So they die really by dozens, by hundreds, and nobody cares. I mean, Russian army doesn't care about its own soldiers, but even less it cares about Ukrainians who fight against Ukrainians.
Yes, and one of the strategy, always Russians had this strategy to go to the territory, Ukrainian territory, to exterminate the locals and to bring in some people from Russia. This is how many territories in Donbass were created and why people say, oh, they're not Ukrainian, etc. Well, because they were artificially cleaned from the locals, from Ukrainians. The same we can say, of course, about Crimea and Crimean Tatars. And this process is going on, the demographic changes, the artificial demographic changes. Let's talk about Mariupol. So what we know
Mariupol,
about
Mariupol is still maybe the most dramatic chapter of this war, because now city is under control of Kadyrivtsi, and there are no more people in Azovstal. And they organized a kind of a celebration of the 9th May Victory Day in Russia in Mariupol. They organized already press tours, even with international media, to Mariupol. So several journalists were
the
present
so-called media.
So-called, yeah, but this was a kind of some agencies like AFP Maybe some others just used that opportunity to be there and to report, which is extremely difficult. What we hear from Mariupol is dramatic because they are trying to restore. They're starting to try to restore the communications, electricity, water. Nothing functions at that very moment, and there is increasing epidemiologic disaster there because people were buried everywhere in many I don't know, close to
The
buildings,
courtyards, and
courtyards, yes,
yes,
and they were not buried as they had to be, so not so profoundly in the ground, and there was still some possibility, a lot of possibility for them to poison the ground, and if it enters water, for example, which is also destroyed, so it could create a kind of epidemiologic disaster in the city, and a lot of thousand people can die
so
out
we're
of that.
really coming back to the 19th century.
We're going
You
to Middle
know,
Ages.
yeah, when the cholera, for example, can develop because there are dead bodies which are poisoning the water. Yeah,
Yeah.
we are coming back to this, and this is thanks to Russian liberation.
And we do know about. We also know about this filtration process because civilians who left Mariupol, some of them, they are still in this so-called filtration process. And I can't forget this heartbreaking story of a woman separated from her 4 years old child, Alisa. So the woman was a doctor, medical, with Azov battalion, and she was not able to cross to Ukraine, and she just gave her daughter to another woman, and she was able to bring her to her grandmother. But this woman, if I'm not mistaken, she's in Izolatia somewhere in Donetsk, and they even recorded a video with her when she was asking her family to let Alisa, her daughter, come and join her in Donetsk. And it is evident that this video was recorded under pressure. This grandmother reported that she was looking not directly into camera, but in kind of on the left, on the right, as if somebody was present at that very time. So they're trying to create all this human drama. You can difficultly imagine such dramas which are happening to normal people, and it's happening to many people, and some of them are still in filtration process. Some people who survive that process say that this is just easy, so they just check your documents and your body for signs if you're military or not. But people who don't pass this filtration, so called, they are unable to tell the real story how it is happening. So it's an extremely dramatic story for thousands of people, those who left Mariupol and those who are still in Mariupol, because they live in poverty, they live out of this humanitarian aid of Russians, and because they work for food. At least what we know from the 9th of May of this Ukrainian journalist Victoria Roshinava, former colleague who was able to enter Mariupol, and she reported on the 9th of May, and she talked to local people, and they were saying that for that very moment they are promising kind of salaries, but for that very moment there is just work for food. It's a kind of slavery. I don't know how to what the proper name for that, but what is clear that Mariupol is no longer here. So there's a kind of a huge symmetry, a lot of destruction, a few people who can do nothing about against, and Kadyrovci. So it's a kind of prize. I don't know how you call it in the war, when just Putin gave this city of Mariupol to Kadyrov like a gift. So now you can do everything you like there.
That's symbolic that Mariupol is like the second Grozny, right? And these Kadyrovцы are those Chechens who lost the war. Not those Chechens, but the kind of not the real Chechens who fought against the Russian army, right? But the collaborators. And the fate of Grozny now repeating as Mariupol, and these collaborators, Chechen collaborators with the Russian army, now controlling the city. Let's move forward and try to talk about some geoeconomical things. We talked already about sanctions and everything. I think one of the conclusions that we can make that sanctions, simple sanctions targeting, some oligarchs, some members of the family, are not enough. What is really needed, what is really at stake, is something fundamental that makes up Russian budget and Russian, including military budget. We understand that this is oil and gas. There is nothing more than oil and gas. Russia is so much dependent on oil and gas exports. And the real question is whether there will be embargo on oil and gas, whether the European Union, for example, will impose embargo on oil and gas. And I think this is also will be one of the key questions in the coming months, because we have seen a decision of the European Commission to cut gas supplies, Russian gas supplies to the EU by two-thirds. I think this makes 100 cubic meters of gas, which is a huge amount, of course. But there is certain skepticism among European and Ukrainian, some Ukrainian experts. For example, we asked Mikhailo Honchar, who is one of the well-known Ukrainian energy experts. We published his analysis on our Twitter recently. Uh, it will be very difficult to make a story short. Well, very difficult for the EU to reach this goal, although it was announced by the European Commission. And for Germany, for example, which is very independent on that, there will be a need for very significant steps. For example, to accept that more gas, much more gas, should come from the other countries like LNG, liquefied natural gas, including from the United States. And here we can hear all these conspiracy theories that it is all in the America's interest to have this war, etc. And and this will be opposing to this decision to get more gas from the United States. Second, Germany will need to probably rethink its phasing out of its nuclear plants, because uh, gas is also doing a lot of work in electricity generation, and Germany is phasing out nuclear power plants. It is also so strange for us Ukrainians to see that, for example, France and other countries are increasing nuclear energy, Germany is decreasing nuclear energy, so no consequent policy across the EU. But because of this decision, unilateral decision of Germany to phase out the nuclear power plants, it gets even in more slavery with Russia. And the third factor is to decrease the kind of this usual average temperature in the apartments, in houses. We know that Europeans are quite, Western Europeans are quite, how to say it, pragmatic. They really like saving energy, and this is very good. Sometimes Ukrainians are much less willing to save energy than the Western Europeans. But really, I mean, the question is whether citizens, ordinary citizens, of course, who might have empathy and sympathy to Ukraine and to Ukrainian struggle, but whether they will be agreeing to have the temperature in their apartments like 2 degrees lower than they used to have, which will of course cut the dependency on Russian gas. But so the big question is there whether Europe will be able to achieve these goals, which are announced by the very European Commission.
And whether this solidarity we feel now will last for months and for years. Just enough will last enough for Ukrainians to be able to win the war. This is a big question. We do hope that this will be possible, but let's see. And everything becomes complicated when you start talking about sacrifices. You know, everybody is sympathetic with Ukraine. That's quite clear. Everybody understands that this is a just war for us. So
Everybody, you mean the Western world?
I mean the Western world. But when it comes to pragmatic interests, things become much more complicated. But um, I would say that we have to find solutions. So Ukraine never wanted to be kind of a part of the problem. we can be part of the solution for many things. Even for example, we are talking about exporting our electricity now, and a country which is in war at that very moment, we are still able, and we are losing from this gas story, because Ukraine was receiving money for gas transit for many years, and it was important part of Ukrainian budget. Now with this all these talks about to cut Russian gas, we will definitely lose
Yeah,
this
it's about several $billion that
two or $3 billion.
Ukraine will lose if there is no transit of
Yeah,
Russian gas through
but we
Ukraine.
are talking already about the about exporting our electricity, and all these dramatic changes. So we have no dependence on Russia, on Belarus neither. So, and we are able already to export. So maybe we should think in terms of being a part of the solution, not be a part of a problem. And we are sorry to hear the word we are afraid of. So this is maybe not the moment to be afraid of something, because this is a kind of we do feel that this is a kind of a decisive historical moment, not only for Ukraine. It goes far beyond Ukraine. It is about the future of the continent. So we have to take right decisions, and not to be afraid of that we have to live alone our habits and all these our paradigms we used to think in. So it could be different, but it's not obligatory that it will be a problem. So let's think
And
about solutions.
the last conclusion probably of these 3 months is that life comes back to the war-torn territories very quickly. Actually, very quickly, we travel a lot in the villages around Kiev, uh, even in Bucha, that of course, this word life has come back. I think rather quickly, despite all these tragedies. When we travel across villages, we see people whose houses were severely damaged. They, without taking any money from the state, it is still a very long process. We don't know whether Ukrainians and when Ukrainians who suffered from this destruction will be able to get some money from the state. As far as they see in the villages right now, they're just making up, compiling the lists of people who suffered and houses which are destroyed. So this will be a very long process. But despite all that, people on their cost, Ukrainian peasants are not that rich, but on their cost, they try to rebuild what they can. Of course, if the house is totally destroyed and we see only a skeleton of the first floor, well, they will stay there for probably many years. But other houses which are kind of shelled a little bit with the bullet holes, etc., people really try to rebuild it and reconstruct it, and
And
the
what we
life is
see
going on.
is, yeah, it's about houses, but it's also about all the cleaning. So we still see some tanks, several tanks in these villages, but most of these tanks, of these burnt tanks, they are taken away. So there are a lot of cleaning already done in villages. And sometimes you enter a village and you, for example, you remember these images from TV 1 month or 2 months ago, maybe 1 month and a half ago, and we just don't recognize the scene because it's different. It's completely different because it takes so people do everything possible to restore villages, to restore houses if they can, to make it as before there was. So
It's
it's also
like
about roads
it's like spring, spring is coming.
after.
It's now spring, and we see all these trees are now covered with the flowers, with the leaves. Spring in Ukraine right now, this particular moment, is just fantastic. The climate is perfect, and you see such a beautiful sky. You see the sun, and the villages are just sunk in this green reality, and as if the peasants just or people in the cities try to continue this trend and be like spring, to revive their life. And this is also remarkable. Of course, it doesn't mean that everything is fine. There are lots of destructions. especially in the cities, in the multi-store buildings, multi-floor buildings. But there is this drive to rebuild. So this was our episode in which we try to draw some conclusions from these 3 months of war. This was a podcast explaining Ukraine by UkraineWorld.org. My name is Volodymyr Yermolenko. I'm chief editor of UkraineWorld.org. I was joined by Tetiana Harkova, who is in charge of international outreach at Ukraine Crisis Media Center. Follow us on Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, SoundCloud. You can also support us on Patreon, patreon.com/UkraineWorld. Stay with us and stand with Ukraine.